My name is Dane Smith, and I am the training manager here at Enghouse Interactive. Let's go ahead and get started then on our reporting webinar. A couple of things that you can expect from today. We'll be going through reporting basics, how to read our reports, things to look for in our reports. A lot of times people ask, what is it that, I have reports, I use it, I run these reports, but what am I looking for? And then once you've found certain things, well, what could be causing this, and where do I go from there? So we'll go through some of those things. We have about 2 hours, so we have quite a bit of time to go through some depth on some of these things. Q reports. Well, that's one of the big popular reports, obviously. You all have queues, you all have traffic that's running across these queues. So we'll take an in-depth look at some of the different queue reports. There's quite a few of them. And what I'll do is, instead of running through everything, which would be a really shallow view of everything, I'd rather go ahead and dive into the most popular, the ones that I think that are going to help you all the most. So we'll go through that with the queue reports. Same thing with the agent reports. We have quite a few different agent reports, and it can get kind of confusing knowing which one do I actually look at for this. And I'll show you some of these, and I'll show you where to start. And then from there, once you've looked at maybe a few of your agents, you can start to narrow it down and say, you know what? I would like to know more about this specific person based on the information that I'm seeing in this report. We'll also take a look at some miscellaneous reports. We may not, depending on time. I don't know if you all know, but Touchpoint has maybe not a report in it, but something that allows you to view your statistics up through the current time, starting at midnight that day, or 12:01 for that matter. So we might point that out depending on time. And then there's Snapshot. Now, Snapshot, I could do an entire webinar just on Snapshot. But I do want to point out that Snapshot is something that allows you to put a wallboard up, or a lot of times what people will do is take Snapshot and put it as a tab within Touchpoint so that they can quickly take a look at what some of the different metrics that they're measuring might be. And lastly, we'll go through personal reports. Now, personal reports are one of my favorites because they allow the supervisor, the administrator, team leads, whoever has the ability to run these reports, it gives them the capability of setting up reports ahead of time that they know they're going to have to run on a daily basis or a weekly basis. And you can even go as far as scheduling them and setting them up so that you can email them out to different people. So you could have this thing run at 5 a.m. or 2 a.m. for that matter. Send out an email, and then you come in the next morning and have that email waiting for you in your mailbox or your email. So why don't we go ahead and get started then? One thing I do want to point out, we have an upcoming classroom training, and that's going to be the 3-day Administration Foundation course. It's from the 27th of this month through the 29th in our Chicago office. This is a really useful class if you haven't taken it before. It's something that allows you to, basically get an in-depth hands-on training where you'll walk out knowing how to set up new agents, add and configure new queues, set up and record progress announcements, work with callbacks, auto attendance, everything, pretty much everything within Administrator we go through, security, all types of settings and alerts and things like that, so you really have a good grasp of it. I really encourage you to take that course, something that, because it's a lab environment where you'll have hands-on experience, gives you that chance to really start from a base level configuration, and you would be actually adding to that configuration as we go through it in class. If you're interested in where you can find information on it, either email me or you can check online under our services training, and it's customer training. So, looking at our reports, What I'm going to do is I'm going to start off with a bit of a PowerPoint, and I know how exciting PowerPoints can be, but I think it's necessary to go through some of these basics, and then what we'll do is I'll jump over to running the reports on the actual system. I've got some canned reports with what I've done is gone in and put highlights and things like that so we can really see what I'm looking at as opposed to me saying, nope, look 3 lines down and to the left. Now, the first thing I wanted to get started with is talking about some statistics. And I realize how interesting statistics can be, especially on a webinar. But if we look at the insurance industry, well, if we look at a specific industry, the insurance industry with a callback center, or a call center, rather, the average agent makes about $36,000 a year. Now, I realize these are averages, but let's just go with this for now. It is about, from what those I've spoken to in the industry, about $36,000 a year. The average length of a call in the insurance industry call center is about 6.5 minutes. Now, when all is said and done, and all of that is averaged up, that comes to about 12 cents for every 20 seconds of talk time. Math might be a little off, but it does average in 2 different sets of statistics. Now, why does that matter to you? Well, if you take 1,500 calls per day, your call center, and you're able to shave off 20 seconds per call, you save $3,900 a month, which equals $46,800, almost $47,000 per year for your call center. And reports are the first place you should be looking for these inefficiencies. So, why don't we get started and see what we can find here? Let's first start with the reporting basics. Things you need to know before we even get started. Detailed queuing reports are kept for 3 months. Well, what does that mean? Well, it gives information, the details, it gives information, calling line ID, wait time, ring time, whereas the historical, which is what it does become after that 3 months, and by the way, that 3 months is by default. It can be changed, and we'll take a look at that in a second. But when it moves to historical, it starts giving more, it starts looking at least for queues, every 15 minutes, and it kind of averages everything together. And then not giving specifics of this specific call came in at this time. It doesn't give that. When you move over to agent information, it really just gives, well, like I said, averages. So it's if you're looking for specifics, one of the things you ought to look at doing is changing your historical reporting period when it switches over from 3 months up to 12 months. Now, one thing I want to point out before everybody runs out and starts making this change, in doing so, this will increase the amount of bandwidth, the amount of hard drive space that your database server is using for the reports, because all of a sudden you're saving a lot more detailed information instead of just saving these historical reports, which are averages. But if you wanted to go in and change that, you can go into Administrator, File Menu, System Setup, and then if you go to the Queuing tab, there's an option on the bottom right to change that. Now, I want everyone to note, so that you're not having to frantically write this down or frantically run to it, we're going to record this and post this on Litmus, which is our online training environment. I will also happily share the slides with you. One thing I have done, just so you know, I have put a handout on the webinar, and that is our QRC, our quick reference card, and that is for the reports. It's just an easy thing, a PDF you can print out, give to your supervisors, email it over, so that they can then use that when they're running reports as a little guide or reminder for all of these things. To take a look real quick, if I jump over to Administrator, let me move that so we can see it better. I can go to File, System Setup, or File Menu rather, System Setup, the Queuing tab here, and if you look right down here, it says Keep Detailed Records for, well, I can change that up to 12 months. Now it does warn me this is going to increase the database size, so be careful when you're doing that. For now on our system, I'm not going to do that, but I just wanted to point out that is something that you can go in and do, and it is quite helpful if you're looking to save information back to a year. Another thing that I want to point out, calls are not actually written to the reports database until they're hung up. Well, what does that mean? Well, if you have 100 agents on the floor, and let's say 50 of them are on the phone currently, and you run a report, and you look at the numbers and think, that doesn't make sense. I should have more information or more calls in my reports. Well, keep in mind, you've got 50 people still on the phone. It's not logging to the system saying, nope, they're still on the phone, they're still on the phone. No, it waits until it's actually the call is finished and hung up, and then it writes it to the database. Now, how to read our reports. I'll go through this, and I like to at least point these out because a lot of people are confused as they're running our reports, and I can only assume that you all have at least seen our reporting and at this point of what I'm showing you. If you haven't, as we get to it in the latter half of this webinar, this will make a little bit more sense. But these things you're seeing over here on the right, with the checkboxes, that is a screenshot from the reports, and blown up quite large, in fact. And what it's showing is I can choose which types of calls or call types I would like to run reports on, or at least have included in the specific report I'm running, is a better way of saying it. Well, C, that's for callback. And what it's saying is, when was it lodged? So for those of you who may not know, callback is where I can call into the system, or I call in as a customer, and let's say there is a 20-minute hold time, or the queue is just backed up. And a good example is when I travel quite a bit. And when I'm on the road, especially in the winter, when I'm in those places that just have crazy, crazy snowstorms, I will end up getting stuck because flights are canceled. So I'll call into the airline, and it's pretty typical that those airlines are absolutely slammed. Everyone else is thinking the same thing. They're trying to do their rescheduling as well. Well, some airlines, most of them in fact, will say, right now we have a heavy call volume, please hold, or you can leave a short message with your number and we will keep your place in the queue, your position in the queue, and when it gets to an agent, they will call you back. Well, that's what callback is. So where you're seeing the C, the letter C, that is marking where I, as a caller, have decided to lodge that callback and wait for an agent to then call me back. Now, the 1 through 9, and even the star, which is the very, very top on the column on the right, that is indicating how many times your agents have tried to call these people back who lodged the callback. So if you see numbers in there in your queue performance report, I said, why am I seeing a 2 or a 1? Or what does that mean? Well, that's saying your agents received that callback, came to their station, they listened to the message, they hit callback, and it rang to that person, to that customer who lodged the callback. And then based on how they resolve it, it then lets people, if they did resolve it, great. If they didn't, it's important that they put that they didn't so that it can go back to another agent. But that's a whole, we'll do a callback webinar at some point. An abandon, everybody's favorite. So an abandoned call is when they hang up on us before we could actually answer the call. This is a bad thing. This means we either didn't answer the call soon enough, or something happened that caller decided, you know what, I don't have time to wait anymore, and they hung up. Now, I know that's very generalized. It could be everything from their phone got disconnected to, they realized it was the wrong place they were calling. But for the most part, abandons are consider the bad thing in a call center. The hang up. Well, the H. Well, what is this and what's the difference here? Well, a hang up is when we play a message or an announcement and then hang up on that caller. Now that might sound absurd if you've not seen this before, but the benefit of using hang up is at things like on a holiday or at night, because if I call into the system and the system plays an announcement where it would be set in the mode of the queue to play an announcement, it would then, and I'll jump over and show you in a second where this, in fact, let me show you now. If I go to my queues, under queuing, queues, and I'll just grab this one here, and I'll go to my modes. Well, if I have this set, in fact, we'll look at this night mode. If I have it set, and a lot of people do, for play announcement, they think, great, I'm going to play them an announcement saying we're currently closed. We'll just pick, we'll say for testing. And it says, oh, we're currently closed, please call back later. But because we're not hanging up the phone, it's on that caller to then hang up. And if you think about it, that would then create an abandon call. So what we do is we suggest that for your night mode, holiday mode, emergency mode, anything where you're playing in them an announcement and then you don't need to talk to them because there's nobody there to talk to them, well then set it to hang up. So it'll play that announcement and then hangs up. Now, at the bottom here, you'll see that it says you may not see all these call types. A lot of this may depend on your licensing, but I like to go through everything. Now, the next one here, IVR. It's basically just interactive voice response. Some of you may have it. It's sort of like here with the power dial. This is outbound queuing, out dial, sort of like if you're using a campaign to call out to all of your customers to let them know that there's a sale on widgets. Well, this is how you can set it up so that it's just delivering to the next agent. It's delivered to the agent, and then all of a sudden it's dialing that customer so that the agent can then tell them about the sale. Network. This is something we don't see as much anymore because of technology changing, but I do like to point it out. A network call is essentially when let's say East Coast and West Coast, and they both have their own PBX running the Enghouse, the EICC software. So with independent databases. This is how it can transfer from one to the other without it being an external transfer. A picked call, well, that's something that I haven't seen very often either. It's with the NEC PBXs, and that allows people to go in and request, basically punch in a code and it requests the call over to their phone. Now, recovered call, this, on the other hand, I see way too much. A recovered call, and we're going to spend some time talking about this, a recovered call is when the phone rang to your agent for 15 seconds, they didn't answer the call because maybe they got up and walked away and didn't put themselves in a break, or they decided to wait until, because they were doing something in their desk, it rang for 15 seconds. The system detects that and says, ooh, that person must not be there. We don't want that phone to ring there. So we'll pull it back into the queue and deliver it to the next available agent. Now, one thing people do ask me sometimes is, how does it decide who it's going to deliver to next? And the answer is, it looks at the most idle agent. So whoever's been idle longest, well, they get delivered the next call. So if you have that agent always saying, hey, I'm always getting delivered the call and they're not, well, I don't want to say that they're wrong, but I'm going to say that they're probably wrong. They're probably just being oversensitive about it, and you can certainly check the system and make sure that these other people are all in the queue set up properly, but I do always see one or two folks complaining that they're getting more calls than everybody else. So recovered calls, we'll talk about this in a second a bit more, but it's when the phone rings to that agent, they don't answer that call in 15 seconds, it pulls back to the queue and delivers to the next most idle agent. A transfer. This is something that people get confused. It is not, I want to make that clear. A transfer is not me, Dane Smith, getting a call and transferring it over to Bob. It is not that. If you ever see a transfer, a T, in your reporting, that is saying that the queue transferred that call. Now, what does that mean? Well, how could a queue transfer a call? Well, if you think about it, if you're using, let's say, an auto attendant, or you have it set up so that if nobody answers or you have no available agents for some reason, everybody went to lunch, you can set it so that it's going to, call comes in and it detects nobody's there, it transfers it off to a different queue or a different external number. My doctor does this. When I call in after a certain hour, I have the ability to press a button and it will transfer my call to the attending, the physician on call. Well, if they were using our system, it would show up as a transferred call. So don't get that confused with me receiving a call as an agent and then transferring it over to somebody else who is an agent, or even to another queue. A transfer is always the queue is transferring that call wherever. Now, voicemail, that is when you're using the ZCOM, or as it's now named, the Enghouse Interactive, EICC, you're using our voicemail system. So if you're using Skype or Avaya or Cisco, and you're using, or NEC or whatever it may be, and you're using that system's voicemail, if you're checking your voicemail through the phone, most likely you're using, I say most likely, it could be done the other way, but most likely you're using Avaya or Cisco or that system's voicemail. A direct call. A direct call is to an extension, not through the queue. Now, what that means, and the easy explanation that I use is, let's say I'm an agent, and I'm sitting there at my desk, and my boss decides to call me to my extension. Well, that call would then show as a direct call that came to my extension because it didn't go through the queue. It came right to my extension. Now, on the other, not on the other hand, but another example is, let's say I'm sitting there and I'm doing my job, waiting for my next call, and my wife calls. She calls my direct extension or my direct DID and wants to tell me, I don't know, to pick up cat food on the way home or to pick up laundry detergent or whatever she wants me to pick up on the way home. Well, that is also considered a direct call. So a direct call could be from extension to extension, or it could be from an outside number calling. So if you have, let's say, a loan agent who's takes a queue call, talks to that customer, has to do some research or ask that customer to go find some other information, gives them their direct extension or a direct line and says, call me back when you've got this information. That customer calls back in, not through the queue, that will show up as a direct call. Now, if somebody, and I'm going to jump down, if somebody does not answer a direct call, well, if you look at the very bottom option, that shows up as an unanswered call. Just means that they didn't answer a direct call. Now, quite often I'll have supervisors or team leads or administrators say, yeah, this is really disturbing. I see quite a few agents who have unanswered calls. Well, it may be disturbing if it's you that they're not answering, and that's fair if they're ignoring your call while they're seeing it come in. But if you think about it, if I'm an agent and I'm sitting at my desk and I'm talking to a customer who called in through the queue, they called in, came into the queue, and I answered that queue call. But then my wife decides to call to tell me about the funny thing she saw on Facebook, and I don't answer that call because I'm currently talking to a customer, like I should be, and I don't answer it. Well, it's going to show up as an unanswered call. So I like to point that out because it's not always a bad thing that your agents have unanswered calls next to their names when you run these reports. Now, let's talk about some of the things that you should be looking for when you run your reports. Recovered calls, that is a biggie. And the reason I say that is, as we talked about a few minutes ago, a recovered call means that a call came into an agent, it rang for 15 seconds, they did not answer that call. A queue call specifically, I need to clarify that, not a direct call, but specifically a queue call, and they didn't answer it. The queue, or the system pulls it back into the queue and delivers it to the next most idle agent. It would then register an R next to that agent's name for that call. Usually you'll see, and we'll look at it in a bit, you would see the same phone number one or two lines down in your report where it got delivered as a queue call to the next agent. Well, if you see an R next to somebody's name, that is bad. I like to point that out. It's bad if you're seeing the R next to them. It means they, let's say they, let's say they didn't set themselves in a break when they got up and walked away from their desk. When we do new installations, I always see it where an agent says, "Oh, I just need to go grab my water. It's right over there." And they jump up, run over. Well, the second they do, Murphy's Law says that phone is going to ring. And of course it's going to ring longer than 15 seconds. And not longer, because after 15, it pulls it back to the queue and logs them out. It actually does an auto log out. And depending on how you have it set, it could either be an auto log out break or an auto log out work time, or even auto log out of the system. So these are the kinds of things that, as a supervisor or a system administrator and team lead, you need to keep an eye on. So if you're seeing these R's, it's time to have a talk. Are your agents actually answering the phone in a timely manner when the calls come in? I've seen it quite often. Usually it's not on the sales side because the sales folks fight for their calls. They get upset when somebody else is getting more calls than them. They want those calls. But on, let's say, a support side or some of these poor customer service people who take a beating, verbally every day, maybe they said, I can't do another one right this second. I'm going to let the phone ring. Well, if they do and it goes 15 seconds, like I said, it will then register an R next to their name for that call and auto log them out. The other thing to look at, is it always the same person, the same agent? I start to see trends over time where I realize, you know what? It is quite often the same agent who has these bad habits of doing that. So just something to keep in mind and to keep an eye out for. Abandons. Everybody's favorite, like I've said. Did the caller abandon early in the day or late in the day? What about lunchtime? Did they abandon then? And where I'm going with that is, if they abandon early in the day, let's say you open at 8 and you have 2 agents in. Actually, let's say you open your queues at 6 a.m. and you have 2 agents taking calls from 6 a.m. to 8 a.m. Then at 8 a.m. you have the rest of the staff showing up. Well, if they called at 6:05 and your agent just got in and one of them takes an immediate call and the other one takes an immediate call, and that caller, the third call, is waiting there, well, maybe you didn't have enough prime agents available to take these calls, and that person had to wait longer than they felt like waiting, obviously, so they hung up. Same thing can happen at the end of the day, or at lunchtime for that matter. If your agents all decide to go to lunch at the same time, well, that becomes an issue, because then you don't have enough staff or prime agents. And when I say prime agents, that means agents that have immediate delivery. So the call comes in and it hits the queue and it delivers to that next available agent. That's if they're set as prime agents with 0 delay. If they've been set as a delayed agent, maybe you have a 20-second delay on that agent before the call actually gets delivered to them. That's a delayed agent. So we're looking at how many prime agents were available, and I'll show you how to check that in the reports when we get into it. How long do the callers wait before they abandon? Well, are these abandons showing as 5 seconds? Well, I don't know that we can blame anybody but the caller, who may have realized, you know what, it was the wrong place. Or if they did call in at 7 a.m. on the way to work, and they decided to go through a drive-thru. They're waiting in the drive-thru. They've called into you all, and then the person in the drive-thru says, "Can I take your order?" And they say, "Screw it." They hung up. Well, I don't think anybody's to blame on your side. I think that at that point is just the caller. So it's worth looking into how long those callers waited before they abandoned. Now, on the other hand, if they waited over 5 minutes or even over 60 seconds, and that in your environment is considered a long period of time, then yeah, that's also worth looking at, and maybe considering, you know what, maybe we should put a progress announcement in, or maybe we should start offering callbacks so that these callers don't feel like they just have to wait and hold and hold and hold on their phones. We can let them lodge a callback, and we'll call them back once it gets to an agent. A lot of people are doing that. It's really a helpful little tool. As I've said, how many prime agents did you have logged in at that time? The next thing, talk time. Well, did your agents talk for a really, really, really long time, or did some of them? And if so, why are they talking so long? It depends on the industry. We have one customer who's an antivirus company. So if you call into them, they are going to be on the phone with you for about an hour. I think that's the average, they say. Hour to an hour and a half, maybe, helping you get rid of that virus on your computer. So for them, having talk times of an hour are not uncommon. In many environments, insurance industry, like we were talking about earlier, it said 6.5 minutes is the average. Well, if you saw a 20-minute call, you start to wonder what's going on. Now, on the other hand, if you have really short talk times, same thing. What's going on with those? Why is that agent talking for 3 seconds over and over and over? Are they hanging up on the caller? I've seen it. It does happen. I've seen some crazy things, to be very honest, things that I didn't realize. It explains how they get the reports that they get, but I just didn't realize agents were really doing those things. It's impressive how hard people will work to not work. I'm always blown away by that.